Hello, everybody, and good evening. Welcome. Hope everybody had a wonderful day. As we do, we'll give a few minutes for everybody just to make sure everybody is taking their time to join. If you're not on mute, please mute your device. Thank you. We'll wait just another 2 minutes and then begin. The sources for tonight are in the chat. Thank you for coming. Hope everyone had a wonderful day and look forward to journeying together with everybody tonight for the Jewish Life Cycles series. It was a 3-week, and now might be a 4-week section when we go through all of the Jewish life cycles together. People are still entering. Hi guys, good evening. Any opening questions before we begin? Any questions on last week? Any questions on the week before? We've journeyed together through the life cycles. We've had baby naming, the birthing journey and process, the Brit Milah, the ritual circumcision, the naming for a young baby girl, the Bar and Bat Mitzvah process, what it means, what the focus should be, what's important. And last week we covered the Jewish engagement section, how we find a suitable marriage partner, and began the journey towards the chuppah, the wedding canopy, with Jewish Life Cycles Wedding Part 1. So any questions on anything we covered last week or the week before? No, everyone's ready to have a circumcision, a bar and bat mitzvah, and a wedding?
I do have one question.
Go for it.
I just want to, I guess this is personal, since in terms of like, say, second marriages or people getting married older in life, I'm in my 50s, as is my fiance.
Mazal
Are there
tov.
any different, oh, thank you. Thank you. Are there any different rules, or is it basically still the same as if you were marrying, say, in your 20s?
It's a really great question. Thank you, and thank you for asking such a personal, sincere question. When it comes to the ritual wedding ceremony, there are no differences in the eyes of Judaism at whatever age you're getting married. When it comes to any element of the wedding ceremony, the only differences are some customs. As people get older, we could naturally assume that they might no longer have living parents. I don't know your particular circumstance or your fiance, but there's customs with parents and their role at the ceremony, but there's no difference to how the wedding should be ritually. From a wedding standpoint that's not a Jewish answer, I would have an extra long dance bracket. I know a dance really hard. And make sure you have a good open bar. We can talk offline about what I would recommend, but there's nothing Jewish that needs to be done differently. But a fair question.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Since Joe opened up with such a personal question. All right, so let's dive straight into tonight's topic, which is a Jewish wedding part 2. Recap just from last week, we focused on the engagement, the focus of having a predestined individual. That's the other yin to your yang, the other half of your soul, where we recognize in Judaism that there's a complete aspect to a bride and groom coming together. And when you find your bashert, which is that Yiddish word, when you come together with your predestined life partner, it is really the rejoining of two souls. We also focused on some of the qualities that we want to make sure that we look for, and spotlighted some of the better qualities. And now we're going to focus a little bit on the concept still of being alone, and then the wedding, and then begin. I believe we left off on page 3 on the source sheet, but we'll actually go back to page 1 just to look again. We spoke about the concept of why get married, and I think I asked everybody some questions, right? Why the concept of getting married? Why go ahead with the exercise of getting married? And perhaps we can say in many circumstances, the expense and the trouble and the heartache and the nerves and the anxiety. Of course, it's all fun. Don't take what I'm saying all literally. But why go ahead with the marriage? What do we gain from getting married? And remember some of the answers? I know who said what, so let's see if you do. What was the answers given? Why get married?
I know I said to do it in the eyes of God.
Excellent. So there's something Jewish, there's something spiritual, something religious about coming together in a relationship in the eyes of God. But we also look straight, and thank you, Alexandra, we also look straight at the text of Genesis that tells us very clearly that we're not ultimately meant to be alone, and we're meant to be together. And there's a suitable partner, we believe, for me and for you and for everybody. And we focused on this idea found in Genesis chapter 2:18, with the notion of making a helpmate, making an Ezer Kenegdo, making someone to be a life partner. And that's about, and then we looked at source 4 and source 5, bottom of page 1, that the notion of leaving your parents and cleaving to your partner, both the psychological imprint on leaving your parents' home and your parents' influence and what that means, and the notion of wedding as fulfillment of the commandment, which is the bottom of page number 1. The holy communion of two people allows for the commandment of be fruitful and multiply, which is to have children to come into a reality. Of course, there are many circumstances and many situations where people have children outside of a wedding, either with a life partner or either choose to have children by themselves, and that is a completely acceptable and wonderful initiative and life decision for people. And if that's a specific question you have or want to learn or discuss more about that, feel free to speak to me offline. There also was the question last week about same-sex marriages. I don't remember exactly who asked it, so I'm not going to call on anybody, but it's a very fair question. And there's a lot of material out there on the World Wide Web. Have you guys heard of the internet? So there's a lot of things out there on the internet that, and sometimes your pursuit of Jewish knowledge can be really positive because the internet is a free exchange of information, and also sometimes the opposite, where it can become a little bit challenging to decipher and to determine what is good and what is correct. When it comes to same-sex marriages, and we have very clear opinions that Judaism ultimately does not, Orthodox traditional Judaism does not recognize same-sex marriages. That doesn't mean that people cannot have sexual inclinations to be at the same gender. But when it comes to the actual act and the union of marriage, traditional Orthodox Judaism doesn't recognize them. There are plenty of people who live Orthodox traditional lives, who live with life partners of the same sex. It doesn't impact their ability, desire, or involvement in active Jewish life. But the bottom line is that Judaism does not allow, in a traditional Orthodox setting, for same-sex marriages. Any questions? So there are some sources on page 2, which you can look at on your own time, but I really want to begin on page 3. Everyone with me? If you need the sources, let me know. If you don't let me know, I can't help you. Okay, page 3. So there are 5 sections to the wedding day that I want to focus on tonight. They are outlined to the top of the page. You have a pen and paper or a keypad and can type notes. I can also send you the recording if you want that as well. The first is the Kabbalat Panim, which is a pre-ceremony. The second is the Badekin, which is a Yiddish word, which is a pre-ceremony element as well. The next is the wedding ceremony itself, and we'll talk a little bit about what that is and how that happens. And the next is the Yichud, the moment after the ceremony, and then the wedding meal itself. I tried to write down the key words that I'd like everybody to know from this section of study. And there are words that will define each of them. And you need to be familiar with them because you're either going to be married one day or are married. But you should absolutely have familiarity with these words. If I don't cover any of them by the end of the night, please remind me, we'll go back to them. And let's begin, as I admit more people. All right, the first section here, the Kabbalat Panim. So Kabel is to receive, and Panim is your face. So it's to receive your face. In this context, it's to receive the bride and groom. That typically at a Jewish wedding, we go and we greet the bride and groom when we arrive. Now, today, everything happens very differently because sometimes people have cocktail hours, sometimes people have pre-ceremonies that are private, some people do them publicly. We'll talk all about that a little bit later on. But in a traditional way, in a traditional sense, and certainly back in the shtetl in Europe, and in certainly many traditional Orthodox settings, when you arrive at the wedding, there's a reception for the groom and a reception for the bride. And you as the guest actually have an obligation. Anyone know the obligation of a guest at a Jewish wedding? Anyone want to guess?
Give a gift?
Actually, no, you don't need to give a gift, but it's a very nice gesture.
To make the bride and groom happy.
Excellent, Monica. You as the guest actually have a commandment. You have an obligation to be mesameach chatan vekala, to bring gladness and joy to the bride and groom. Now, Alexandra, your answer might be partially correct because maybe you can bring joy to them by bringing them a gift. But truth is, you bring joy to them by coming with your full self, by coming with your ability to participate. And in many ways, that means to dance and to have fun, and to fully dive into the wedding itself, to be there present, mind, body, and spirit, brings gladness to the bride and groom. So you have a goal and obligation as a guest. When you arrive, if there is the traditional setting, there'll be a reception for the groom and a reception for the bride. The Badekin, number 2, on the top of page 3, is the process and the ceremony that happens at the bride's pre-reception. So looking at the keywords, if I was going to be giving a test at 7:46, I would want to make sure I know what Kabbalat Panim is receiving the faces, literally, but in this context, it's receiving the bride and groom. And the Badekin is the next step after step number 2. The badekin is the only ceremony that happens to the bride before the chuppah, before the wedding ceremony. The badekin is the veiling of the bride. It's a Yiddish word, and livdok actually is Hebrew. It means to check. A bedika chametz, to check the chametz before Passover, when we check our house to make sure there's no unleavened products. It's the same word. And what are we checking here? We're literally checking to make sure the bride is the bride. Why do we do that?
This week's question is wearing a veil.
She's wearing, say again, Tamara, go.
A veil. She's wearing a veil. She lifts it up to make sure it's her.
Right, so she might be wearing a veil, and we'll talk about that. But let's be honest, like who else is going to play bride at the wedding day?
Jacob had Leah and Rachel. He was tricked. He thought he was marrying Rachel and it was Leah because she was veiled.
Excellent. So it actually comes from the Torah portion. When Jacob was tricked because of the veil, like Tamara said, and he didn't know who he was marrying, and because of that ancient story in the Genesis, in Bereshit, which we're reading about in these weeks, the custom has stemmed to go through the veiling of the bride. Now, it's a very nice ritual and a very nice custom, and it's very important, and it happens at all. I'm just muting those that I can hear background noise in. Don't be offended. If you do want to talk, unmute yourself. But I'm exercising the right to be the mute tsar tonight, and I enjoy that. Okay, so, but actually, why do we veil the bride? We veil the bride. I always tell a bride and groom at weddings where I officiate, and it's such a beautiful, sincere reason, is because this is the highest, most joyous day for bride and groom. And typically a bride has spent hours and time thinking about what she's going to wear, the makeup, the color tonations, the hair, and there's so much emphasis on her physical appearance. And what the groom, her soulmate, does the moment that they're about to begin the wedding ceremony, by placing the veil over her head, he attests to her that he is deeply attracted to her physical beauty, and she's shining and radiating in physical beauty, but he's telling her that as much as I'm physically attracted to you, as a side tangent, physical attraction is a very important ingredient in a healthy marriage. And don't think for one moment that Judaism dismisses the need to be physically, sexually attracted to your soulmate, to your partner. It's not tonight's discussion, but it's certainly interrelated, that we believe, both in being physically attracted. Judaism also believes in a healthy sex life. Some people think that's taboo, and that's not true at all. Again, not for tonight's discussion, unless we go there. But what the bride is witnessing the groom do is saying, I'm deeply attracted to your physical looks, but I'm placing this veil over your head because my attraction stems deep into the recesses of your heart, way beyond your physical attire. Who you are, what you represent, the person that you are is why I'm marrying you in just about 10 minutes. And that's what I'm showing you, and also showing the most important people in our life, because they're the ones that normally stand and join at the wedding. So it's a very beautiful idea. There's some Kabbalistic ideas as well about covering the face, but they're the two major ideas. That's the badekin. That's step number 2 of the veiling of the bride. In the men's section, there's a few steps that happen pre-ceremony as well. And here in the key words, we look at the Tanaim, the first word. The Tanaim is a ritual, is a custom that does not need to happen. A lot of people have Tanaim and go through with the Tanaim. A lot of people don't do the Tanaim. So why would you choose to do it? And why would you choose not to do it? But more fundamentally, what is it? The Tanaim is a document that's essentially the formal prenuptial conditions or agreement of betrothal. And it basically serves as an engagement contract. And it's essentially a letter that outlines the decision for you to marry your spouse. And it's a very old ceremony, and it suddenly probably started in the 12th century somewhere. And it was basically an announcement by the two families that had come to terms on their match. Again, going back thousands of years, how did grooms and brides and how did their parents and how did they settle? There would also include a dowry or a financial agreement. My daughter is going to marry your son, and in exchange for that, I'm going to give you 300 cows, 3 camels, and my best young chicken. That's the dowry, and there'll also be a financial exchange. And in the engagement document, which appears like in a contract, you say, we have no financial holds over one another, we have no financial issues with one another, and at a predestined date, my son is going to marry your daughter. Typically, the 2 fathers would sign the Tanaim, bless you, and if the father's not present, the bride and groom can designate somebody else. And the 2 mothers symbolize that Tanaim has been completed by breaking a plate. Anyone seen that before? So the 2 mothers will break a plate at the end of the ceremony. The Tanaim don't need to happen. It's completely binding to have a wedding with no Tanaim. But the reason that people do Tanaim is because they like it, and it's part of the ancient ritual, and people want to continue that custom. But it does not need to happen. If it doesn't happen, it does not in any way, God forbid, invalidate any part of your wedding. So the Tanaim is completed by signing, then the 2 mothers break a plate, and then we have the ketubah completion. That's the 3rd word on the keywords here. The ketubah is the contract of marriage. In Judaism, and this is a custom that stems back for thousands of years, the document of marriage is written from the obligations of the husband to his wife. And the groom is acknowledging that he will uphold his obligations to be a faithful Jewish husband, just like Jewish husbands have been for thousands of years. And in the presence of 2 kosher witnesses, we'll talk about what I mean by kosher in a minute, the groom typically doesn't actually sign the ketubah. The 2 witnesses witness that the groom is understanding what he's saying, that the groom is not held at gunpoint by the bride's father, that the groom is not intoxicated or high, and that he's fully aware of what he's doing. And the 2 witnesses say, yeah, you're going to be a faithful Jewish husband. You're going to provide a roof over her head, and you're going to provide sustenance, and you're going to go on at least 3 vacations a year, and you're going to be a faithful Jewish husband to her. The 2 witnesses acknowledge that, and they sign that they saw the groom doing that, and that's the contract of marriage. And it's like any contract that you've ever seen or ever authored. Any contract, like a rental contract for your apartment, like leasing your car or buying anything, there are really good contracts out there, and there's some really crappy contracts out there. And just like the same way with the ketubah, there are many different versions of a ketubah. So when you choose the ketubah for your wedding, it's usually done in consultation with the rabbi who's officiating. And you want to make sure that you get a proper good text. The ketubah is written in Aramaic. Nobody speaks Aramaic anymore. Even Arabs don't speak Aramaic, just putting that out there. And it's an ancient language, like the Talmud is written in Aramaic, so we keep up with the custom. And many people choose to add English underneath, and that's completely fine. The ketubah in many circles has become a beautiful symbol of Jewish art, and you can look at ketubah.com, ketubahart.com. There are hundreds of websites and individuals who make a beautiful livelihood of designing and drawing beautiful ketubahs. And if you want any recommendations, I have some friends who do them. I get no kickback, but the enjoyment that they have beautiful artwork. But it's a beautiful thing to have a beautiful ketubah. It is given under the chuppah, we'll see in a moment, to the bride, and it's her possession. It's her proof of marriage. And it plays a very important role in the future. Don't have to carry it around, but you need to have it with you for the wedding night. And that's completed before the ceremony at the groom's celebration. Then the badekin happens, and then the formal wedding ceremony begins. The chuppah is the wedding canopy. I get questions all the time from couples who I officiate for. What is the Jewish ritual for the chuppah, and how does the chuppah have to be? The chuppah has no set design or look, except that it's usually open on all 4 sides. And it's a canopy. So think of a tent. In days of old, the canopy was held up by men or women on all four sides, and you would choose friends or family to hold up the chuppah. Nowadays, because we want to think that we're cooler and better, we have these structures that are pre-standing and no one needs to hold them. But the concept is that it's open on all four sides, and it's symbolic of the home that the bride and groom are going to build, and it's symbolic of the home that Abraham and Sarah built, which was open at all times to their friends and to their family and to guests. And we, as the couple stand in the chuppah together, we say, we hope that you'll build a home like Abraham and Sarah. That's always going to be open to your friends and to your family. That's the chuppah. A lot of people spend time and money putting beautiful flowers and plants and trees. A lot of people use a talit, a prayer shawl, underneath the chuppah. That's a very nice custom. Sometimes people use a prayer shawl of a grandfather or family members, or people quilt together a beautiful tapestry. It's all lovely, it's all nice, but nothing is required other than having a canopy. And we have then in the keywords, there's the chatan and kala. The chatan is the groom, the kala is the bride. And let's get back to the wedding ceremony. Any questions?
I have a question, actually.
Go for it.
The ketubah, so the bride does not sign that at all.
The bride does not sign the ketubah in the original Aramaic. Many of the ketubot that I use, and when I say I use, it's always the choice of the bride and groom, because it's an artistic choice. So I'm involved in the selection of the text to make sure that the ketubah represents an authentic, traditional, Orthodox text, but the look and feel, and it's the size, paper cut, watercolor, whatever design and look and feel is up to the bride and groom. But in the Aramaic, there's no place for the bride to sign. A lot of the English versions have bride signing and groom signing and rabbi signing. That's completely fine. I use them all the time. But your question actually is a great segue to why the bride doesn't sign the ketubah. And the bride typically doesn't sign the ketubah because the way that marriage was acknowledged thousands of years ago was an acquisition, that the groom was acquiring the bride. And therefore, the groom is acknowledging that he's going to partake in all these wonderful things to make him a faithful Jewish husband. The bride is accepting that, but doesn't therefore need to sign it. And the groom doesn't also either sign it, because the witnesses sign the ketubah. They're acknowledging the groom is going to do that and be that way. So neither of them traditionally sign it. That's a great question. Any other questions? Okay, so we have the Tanaim, Kabbalah Panim, Ketubah, Chuppah, Chatan, Kala. I will skip over mikveh for now, and we're going to look at the Erusin and the Nisuin. They're in the middle of the keyword section. These are the two elements, aspects, pieces of the Jewish wedding ceremony. And they are rabbinic terms, and they symbolize that there are 2 cups of wine that are used under the chuppah. And anytime there's a ritual in Judaism, we use wine. So think of Shabbat. Give me another one, guys. What's another ritual where we have wine?
Havdalah.
Which one?
Havdalah.
Havdalah, right? So Shabbat is bookended by a blessing over a cup of wine. Excellent. Another one? Passover. So we have 4 cups of wine. All of the holidays, Rosh Hashanah, anytime there's Kiddush recited, there's wine. At a Brit Milah, at a circumcision, there's wine. So wine and the recitation of benedictions, of prayers over a cup of wine plays a significant role. A tangent, not for now, but we'll get to it in another class, I hope. And the reason that we use 2 cups of wine at 2 parts of the wedding ceremony is representing of these 2 words, the erusin and the nisuin. They're rabbinic terms, and they're 2 different parts of the wedding ceremony. When we say the wedding ceremony, I'm always talking about the things that happen under the chuppah. There's the stuff that happens before, the stuff that happens after, but the wedding ceremony in this context is that which happens under the chuppah. The erusin is technically the engagement, which is the blessing over the first cup of wine, which binds the bride and the groom to one another. It forbids them to all others. And then a ring is given with the special recitation. And then the second cup of wine is the nisuin, which represents the marriage. And that needs to happen on the chuppah, and that includes the special 7 benedictions to the bride and groom known as the Sheva Brachot. So let's walk through the process of under the chuppah. Firstly, in terms of time, when I'm officiating, it typically takes 25, 30 minutes, depending on the style of the chuppah. And when I say style of the chuppah, if it's a crowd that's both made up of Jews and non-Jews, people that are familiar with the ceremony, not familiar with the ceremony, sometimes the bride and groom want more explanations, but it normally takes 20 minutes. Bride and groom arrive at the chuppah. There's no ritual that mandates how the processional should be. Another constant question I get is, how do you advise the processional should be? As the rabbi who officiates, I get all these fun questions that people think have things to do with religion, but actually have nothing to do with religion. So I get to consult on the menu and the wine selection and what brand tequila people are having. And I have a lot of fun, but none of this stuff has anything to do with the religious part of the wedding. And I tell the bride and groom that I'm there, and Rachel, we're there to enjoy. But once I'm done at the chuppah, like, I'm just there as a guest. You want my song selection? You want me to help choose a band? I'm more than happy. So the processional can happen or doesn't have to happen. It can be all the bridesmaids, all the groomsmen. It doesn't really matter. It's up to the bride and groom. But typically, the groom is first, standing under the chuppah. The bride will be next. The bride circles the groom 7 times when she arrives to the chuppah. Why does she circle him 7 times? Who's seen this before? Anyone seen this?
I've seen it before, but I don't remember what it represents.
Anyone know what it represents? So if you don't know what it represents, think of the number 7. What does 7 represent? Yes, Ruth. You're on mute.
I have seen it. My daughter, actually, she went around, but I don't remember there was an explanation. With it.
So what does 7 represent? What does 7 represent, anyone? Well, let me ask the question
Isn't the
differently.
7th day the day of rest?
So 7 days, a day of rest, is Shabbat, but 7 represents a cycle. What cycle does 7 represent? The week. Hello. 7 days in a week.
And then
7
the seventh sabbatical year.
Right. 7 is a cycle, and it expands at different levels. Shnat Shemitah, 7 is the sabbatical year. That's correct. But 7 represents a complete cycle in Kabbalistic terms, and there are many deep ideas to 7. But in this setting, a bride circles the groom, representing 7 complete cycles, 7 days of the week, 7 different energies. There are 7 different Kabbalistic sfirot, 7 levels. They arrive together. They stand equally facing the rabbi, and the ceremony begins with the first 2 blessings over a cup of wine, ultimately using the cup of wine as a vehicle to bring God into their relationship. They obviously have a beautiful relationship. They've obviously spent time with one another, and by having a cup of wine and making blessings, you're bringing the bride and groom together with God into their relationship. The groom then gives the bride a ring. The ring, according to Jewish custom, has to be purchased by the groom, has to be plain, gold, silver, or platinum, and has to have some level of value to it. 2 witnesses would be called to witness the groom giving the bride a ring. She places it under the chuppah, on her right index finger, irrespective of whether she's a lefty or a righty. She doesn't have to keep it there forever, but till the end of the ceremony, keep it on the right index finger. The groom declares with the recitation of a short sentence that he's consecrating his wife or his wife is being consecrated to him in accordance with the law of Moses in Israel. He'll read the text in Hebrew and then recite it in English and put the ring on. The witnesses witness that. Then the ketubah, which was completed earlier at the pre-ceremony, is either read out or given into the hands of the bride. It's her possession. She does not going to stand there and hold it, so she'll give it to someone to hold or put back onto an art easel. And then the rabbi typically will address the bride and groom with a wedding speech. And then we have the next cup of wine, which involves the special 7 blessings for the bride and groom. On the keywords section, you see under the word nisuin is the word edim. Edim is the Hebrew and the halachic Jewish term for witnesses. And when it comes to the wedding ceremony, there are 3 sets of 2 witnesses needed. So that's 2, 2, and 2. In Judaism and in traditional halacha, witnesses are men, not women. Witnesses need to be upstanding citizens, and religiously, they need to be what we would call observant. Now, nobody knows what anybody else does in their private life, and we certainly recognize observance in today's time, typically for men, by wearing one of these, even though I choose to blend it with my gray hair. By wearing a kippah, it's an outward symbol that somebody is observant. By keeping Shabbat, it's an outward symbol. And for women, there are many other private symbols as well. But when it comes to the witnesses for a chuppah, it's really people that keep kosher, keep Shabbat, upstanding citizens. And there's 2, 2, and 2, 3 sets of 2. The first 2 witnesses were the ones pre-ceremony who signed the ketubah. And I always encourage a bride and groom to think long and hard about who those gentlemen are going to be, because they're going to be names that will live on your ketubah for eternity. So you should think about who they are. The second set of witnesses are those individuals that come up under the chuppah and witness the giving of the ring. And the last set of witnesses we'll cover in a moment when we talk about the concept of yichud, which is seclusion. If you're having a wedding ceremony and you don't have any Orthodox men, so the rabbi can serve as a witness, and the witnesses can repeat themselves. So it's just really 2 people you need that can be the same witnesses 3 times. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yep.
I'm just wondering why the ring is put on the bride's right index finger.
It's a great question. Why the index finger? I don't have an answer at the tip of my tongue of why the right index finger. But I'll challenge you to come back next week and I'll research it.
Deal.
Thank you.
I have a question. I've heard that you can sometimes the bride will sometimes circle the groom 7 times, but in other cases it might be 3 times. Is that
most traditional circles have the bride circling the groom 7 times. There are, and I should have said this at the start, there are thousands of customs that have crept into our religion when it comes to the wedding ceremony. And people do things that are meaningful to them that end up becoming customs. And I've seen the bride circle 3, and then the groom circle 3, and then they walk around no one, but they walk together once. Okay. And I did a wedding once, and that's what they wanted. So I checked with my rabbi to make sure that it's okay. And he said, there's nothing wrong with it. If it's meaningful to them, do it. So they wanted to do it. I'm not really sure why it was meaningful to them, but as the officiant, I always tell couples, my role is to make sure your wedding is traditional Jewish wedding, but all these rituals and customs that many of them are plug and play, choose what's meaningful to you. So as long as nothing is against a traditional Jewish value or Jewish law, then that's fine. So I don't know about 3. I've certainly seen 7 a lot. I've seen people that don't want to circle, but I haven't seen 3. Any other questions?
I actually have another question.
Yep.
The witnesses, are they family members? Like who are they apart from observant?
Good question. So to be a halachic kosher witness can't be related to the bride and groom by blood or marriage. So many people freak out and be like, I don't have anyone coming to the wedding that fits that. Once again, the rabbi can be, if they're using a kosher caterer, then the mashgiach, the person who's in charge of making sure the food is kosher, or you arrange for someone else to come. The last job of the witnesses is this next word on the keyword section, which is the yichud, and we're up to section 4 on the wedding day outline. The yichud section is immediately following the chuppah, which we'll come back to in a second, and the bride and groom leave the ceremony. There's a song is played if there's a band or a DJ, and they should embrace each other. I also get questioned a lot. What do we do after like the glass is broken? Is it okay to kiss? And I'm like, yeah, it's okay. That's welcome to the first moment of being married. And if you like to embrace, go for it. People are like, I can't tell you how many times there's been just awkward like silence and moment of like, what do we do now? But once all the embracing and the affection and the PDAs have happened for all family members and everyone's jumped on top of each other, the bride and groom walk back down the processional, back down the aisle, and they go into yichud, they go into seclusion. Typically, if we go back thousands of years, that was the time where the young bride and groom would consecrate their marriage and have intercourse. It was the first time that they would be together alone. In a traditional setting, when we're going back to the shtetl thousands of years ago, when sort of the milkman's son and the butcher's daughter were predestined to be married, and people got married a lot younger then, and they were not habituating, fraternizing, hanging out with the other sex as commonly as we do today. And there was certainly no J-swipe, and there was no ways for them to meet other people other than being set up by their parents typically. And they'd only met maybe once, maybe twice beforehand. So before the wedding meal and celebration, right after the ceremony, they would have their first relations and consecrate their marriage. The custom continues. What happens in that room is up to the bride and groom. There's a set time just to make sure that it's binding, which is about 7 minutes for the bride and groom to be in there. You can do whatever you want in that room. If all you need is 7 minutes, take 7 minutes, do what you want. A lot of people take a moment just to reflect on the fact that once those doors open and you go to your wedding celebration and the speeches and the toasts and the dances and all the fun that happens, the bride and groom aren't really alone until very late that night, when they're sweaty and exhausted and maybe hungover or still drunk, if they go that route. And this moment of seclusion, I always tell couples, is just a beautiful gift. It's just a chance to be with each other and to pinch yourself and to recognize the beautiful magnitude of what just happened and to appreciate that just privately with each other before the craziness of the wedding continues. So it's a very beautiful opportunity. That's what, and the last of these two witnesses are standing outside, literally guarding the door to make sure that no one interrupts the bride and groom. That's yichud. And coming back to the end of the ceremony, after the 7 blessings, the Sheva Brachot, which are typically recited by friends and family members, there are 7 blessings. So 7 times people can come up and make a toast on the wine. It is only consumed at the end of the 7th blessing. And the last piece of the wedding ceremony, which is very well known and very popular, is the breaking of the glass. And that symbolizes that while we're uniting today in tremendous joy and happiness and gladness for the bride and groom, and for them and for many of their family members and friends, this is their highest joyous moment in their life. We recognize that as a people, that we still don't have a reunified and rebuilt Jerusalem, and we don't yet have the temple in Jerusalem. So even though we have this highest joy right now for the bride and groom, we're recognizing that there's still a piece of sadness and still a hurt and still a pain that exists in the world because Jerusalem isn't reunified and through the building of the temple. So that's why the custom is to break the glass. That's the wedding ceremony. And then step number 5 is the wedding meal. And I mentioned this last week, and I want to underscore it again today, that the wedding meal is a component of the wedding and is part of the wedding ceremony, because we have a celebration and we have a celebratory meal. It doesn't have to be 7 courses. It doesn't have to be meat, but it should involve washing and breaking of bread. So it should involve making the blessing of hamotzi. and that will allow and require for the grace after meals, the Birkat Hamazon. And then you have this Sheva Brachot, the same 7 blessings that we said to the bride and groom underneath the chuppah. You say again at the end of the wedding, if you do the grace after meals, and the custom is to recite them for the next 7 days. And the bride and groom are considered like a king and queen. And we celebrate them for 7 days after their ceremony. This is a custom and does not have to happen, but a lot of people do continue and have a celebration for 7 days. And that's a really wonderful, enjoyable thing to do. There are 3 books here that I recommend for those that want to read a little bit more about the wedding ceremony. We have them all at KJ if you want to borrow them, or you can buy them on Amazon. I want to focus a little about the wedding day itself and the preparation. Unless there are any questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
So this thing with I think it's a bride that fasts before the wedding. I've been to a Chabad wedding where the bride was fasting. I can't remember what the groom was, as well as in Europe, and they were not Chabad. They were just, traditional. Is this a tradition, or this is a religious custom, or?
Great question.
Sorry?
It's a great question. We're going to talk about it right now. That's a beautiful setup to page 4. I couldn't have planted that question even if I tried. That was well played. We're going to talk about why we fast in just a moment. Thank you, Ruth. Any other questions? No one? Wedding ceremony, we got it down.
I have a quick question. I'm just wondering, is the bride and groom, I guess in maybe more Orthodox environments, praying leading up to this, up to the chuppah, or do they have to pray? Are they praying because they want to, or?
An excellent question. What do you mean because they want to? Like, why would they pray?
I wasn't sure if it was needed or if it's just something that they're doing just to, for good measure.
Okay, so like Ruth's question, it's going to come up in the discussion we're going to have in just a moment about the wedding day and the preparations. But any questions on the ceremony, on the pre-ceremony, the chuppah, or anything else we discussed?
I have another question. Sorry, I
Go
have a lot
for
of questions. When is the first time that the bride and groom see each other? Because I know there's a lot of pre-ceremony stuff. So did the groom and the bride see each other during that, or is it all separate? And then the first time is under the chuppah?
Excellent. So the bride and groom can see each other up until the wedding, but the custom developed to allow for some distance the week leading into the wedding. And the week leading into the wedding is defined either by 7 days not to see each other, 3 days, or day of until the chuppah. There's a whole slew of reasons why one chooses to see each other or not to see each other, but we can all understand the concept of absence makes the heart grow fonder. That having a separation in a time where there's heightened anxiety and stress and pressure is a good thing. In many circumstances, the wedding involves a lot of family issues and interactions that can cause stress. So not seeing each other can ensure that you don't have any interactions that aren't really real, that just end up being silly and little things that blow up into big things. But when it comes to the wedding day itself, a lot of people don't want to see each other, and so they don't want to see the bride in the wedding dress until that moment of the chuppah. So the pre-ceremony would be done separately. A lot of people don't really subscribe to that, and they want to have photos before so they can get that all out of the way. There's no required, there's no desired. It's all individualized. Whatever you want to do. I can tell you that I've only been married once, thank God. And the moment of seeing your bride under the chuppah in her wedding dress, even if we took photos 3 hours earlier, doesn't take away from that amazing feeling and that excitement and thrill of walking, the bride walking towards you with everyone seated down at the wedding. That's my personal feeling, but I've only had it once, so I can't tell you if it would be different for anybody else at any other time. Any other questions?
I have
So
a
if I-
question about the Bedekin.
Yep.
When does that happen? Does that happen once the bride gets under the chuppah, or does it happen before?
No, it's part of the pre-ceremony
Okay.
before the chuppah.
Before.
Now, a lot of people don't like to do these pre-ceremonies publicly. They don't like to invite people to them. They want to keep them small and intimate and private, and that's completely fine. That's sort of trending for a lot of the weddings that I do, where they want to keep the pre-ceremonies, the completing of the ketubah and the badekin, just to, the groom's party and the bridal party, 10, 15, 20 people, or just family, and just everyone gets invited to a cocktail hour, and then straight to the chuppah. But that's all individualized. Looking at Ruth's question about fasting and the second question about praying. The wedding day itself is extremely important and auspicious for the bride and groom. And the spirituality and the holiness of the wedding day is really unparalleled for the bride and groom. And the only analogy that is given by the rabbis is that the day of your wedding is akin to a Yom Kippur, because Yom Kippur is the holiest day. So we say that a bride and groom on their wedding day, it's like a Yom Kippur, the holiest day. And that's why a bride typically wears white. That's why some of the grooms wear the white kittel, the white shroud that they wear on Yom Kippur. And both are symbolic and a reminder of the purity of the new life and the new entity that's being formed by the bride and groom coming together. The concept of fasting exists because of the connection to Yom Kippur. Just like we don't worry ourselves about physical pleasure on Yom Kippur, because we're solely focusing on the spirituality and the awesomeness of the day. So typically a bride and groom want to fast on their wedding day. Fasting doesn't come easy to lots of people, even that it's really cool now to be on intermittent fasting, and that's very new age. Fasting for a lot of people isn't easy, and 100% you do not have to fast. If you don't fast well, you can eat on your wedding day. Wedding day, often you're getting up really early because you've got your makeup and your hair and your this and your that, and you want to, it's a long day not to eat. So I always recommend that you don't have to fast, but don't go to IHOP and have like a pancake breakfast and go all out. Just eat something to sustain yourself, and not to eat too much. The prayers are very important on your wedding day. It should have added focus and added meaning. If you don't normally pray every day, you should certainly make time to pray on your wedding day. And giving charity is very important on your wedding day. It's also a time to ask forgiveness from your parents. And because the bride and groom are considered like a king and queen, and considered like a king and queen on Yom Kippur, they also have a added ability not to just pray for themselves, but pray for other people. So if there are people that are still searching for their soulmate, if there are people that are in need of a livelihood, if there are people that need of healing, so a bride and groom on their chuppah have tremendous ability to pray for other people. And that's why often you might see a bride and groom have a list of names with them, or they ask people to send you their names in preparation for their wedding. It's a very auspicious and powerful moment under the chuppah. That takes us to the end of page 5, essentially with the end of the day of the wedding. And the last page, page 6, is a question for everybody to think about. Ebony gave me a question to think about, which is the concept of why a right hand is used and the right index finger. But I want everyone here to think about is what makes a Jewish home? Because now that we have a bride and groom getting married, they're going to live together in their new home, or they're going to live together as a bride and groom in the home they lived in previously. But what elements make a Jewish home? How do we make sure that the bride and groom live a Jewish life in their new home? What does it mean to have a Jewish home? What does it mean to run a Jewish home?
Mezuzah.
A mezuzah. So a mezuzah is a physical element that you stick on your door. Is that like check the box, I'm done?
That's one of the things you need to do.
If I don't do it, is it not a Jewish home? And what else do I need to do?
Shabbat. Shabbat?
Keep kosher.
If I don't keep kosher, I don't have a Jewish home. I
What
know really good Jews who don't keep kosher.
Shabbat.
So I'm going to ask the same question. How do I keep Shabbat? I light candles. Do I have to have dinner? And if I don't keep Shabbat, does that mean I don't have a Jewish home? The question was there to make you think and to be a trigger, to make you understand that there are many ingredients and many elements to having a Jewish home. And you want to build a Jewish home. You do not want to build a Jewish museum. A Jewish museum is a home filled with lots of Jewish artifacts, like a Kiddush cup, like a prayer book, like a Chumash, like a Chanukiah menorah. But they're all there, but they don't get used. They're all there collecting dust. That's a Jewish museum. And unfortunately, there are hundreds and thousands of people that live in their Jewish museums. But to have a Jewish home is to have an active Jewish home, is to have a home that functions regularly following Jewish ritual and Jewish customs. And everything that you each said, mezuzah, kosher, Shabbat, throw them all in there. They're all important. But there's dozens more as well. And how we live our life. Are we charitable people? Are we kind people? Are we following a weekly ritual of Shabbat? Do we aspire to learn more and to grow more and to understand more about our Jewish heritage? Do we value Jewish education? Doesn't necessarily mean day school, can mean Hebrew school, but do we want to make sure that what we feel as Jewish is important to our next generation? So we can't end a Jewish wedding class without focusing what it means to have a Jewish home. As important as the wedding is, and people spend so much money, so much time focusing on the wedding, don't forget what happens the day after. And don't forget what happens the lifetime after, which is now that we went to the effort and the level of having a Jewish wedding, to make sure that we have a Jewish home. And with that, I say farewell. Not for very long though, because in 45 minutes, you can join me again from the same comfort of your living room, in the same sweatpants that you're wearing, or whatever you're wearing, for a Pre Shabbat Ruach. I hope you'll join us to go through the Torah portion. Thanks for coming, everybody. If you have questions, I'll hang on. Anyone have any questions? No. Thanks for coming, guys. See you at 8:45. Have a great night. Next week, we'll go through Jewish approach to death and mourning, Shiva, burial, and the customs throughout the year. The names of the books that are recommended are in the source sheet. If you click the link again, I just put into the chat, then you'll be able to see the names of the books. Click the link before I close the chat, and there are 3 books there on Jewish wedding ceremony. Got it?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you, Rabbi. Thank
Have a
you.
good night.
Have a good night.
Night.